Hi, my name is Amy Scholten, and I'm from the Renfrew County Legal Clinic. I'm an executive director and a lawyer who practices in housing law. We cover the entire county of Renfrew, and we advocate on behalf of tenants. I'm here today to talk to you about the difference between renting a room and renting a house or an apartment. Renting a house or renting your own apartment is generally covered under the Residential Tenancies Act. There are a few exceptions to that, but most of the laws that govern that type of tenancy are within this act. It sets out the rights, responsibilities, and obligations and procedures that landlords and tenants are required to follow. It includes the terms and conditions for tenancy agreements. It also includes things like not having rules about no pets being allowed. It covers landlord's responsibilities regarding repairs and substantial interference. And it also includes landlord's responsibilities on privacy as well as other issues. In terms of tenants' responsibilities, it sets out things like that tenants are responsible for cleanliness and for damage and for not interfering with the reasonable use and enjoyment for the landlord or other tenants in the same building. It also includes other rights and responsibilities, but this just gives you a snapshot for what some of the responsibilities are for tenants and landlords. The security of tenure rules, the process, subletting, assigning tenancies, and the rules surrounding rent are all included in this act. It talks about how somebody can be evicted, the grounds, the process, the procedures, offenses that can be committed under the act, or I should say, that cannot be committed under the act, and the power of the landlord and tenant board, among other things. The intention or the purpose of this act is to protect residential tenants from unlawful evictions and unlawful rent increases. It establishes a framework of regulations for residential tenancies. It balances the rights and responsibilities of residential landlords and tenants. And it provides an adjudication process so that people can informally resolve their disputes in the event that they're able to do so prior to a hearing. The law regarding residential tenancies is very large, but for today I want to kind of narrow things down and talk about a couple of different scenarios to give you a better snapshot of what you're looking at if you're a landlord or if you're a tenant. So scenario number one, I want to talk to you about what happens if you're renting a room. Renting a room you could be sharing with other tenants. This is often referred to as rooming houses. In this scenario, no one's living there that's classified as a landlord. No one's there who's the owner. The problem is defining who's the owner and defining who's a landlord, and so that's where things can get a little bit more complicated and you may need legal advice. We provide free legal advice to tenants. At the end of this presentation, I will provide you with a referral for landlords where you can also seek legal advice. In the scenario where you're renting a room and it's a rooming house and there's no landlord or owner in the building that's also living there, the Residential Tenancies Act applies. This change was implemented a number of years ago. So rooming houses are now covered under the Residential Tenancies Act. The second scenario is a little bit different. This one, you're required to share a kitchen or a bathroom with the landlord or the owner. And it is the primary full-time residence of the owner's spouse, child, parent, or some other immediate relative living in the same building. The definition that's used in this scenario is a little bit stricter than is used in other scenarios. It's predominantly looking at ownership because landlord is defined very broadly in the Residential Tenancies Act. So if, again, you're uncertain as to whether or not this person is an owner or this person is a landlord, we suggest that and strongly recommend that you get legal advice so that you know whether or not the Residential Tenancies Act applies or whether or not you're having to go to the common law, which is case law. in order to find out about your rights and responsibilities. So the second scenario, where you're sharing a unit with somebody who is an owner, the law looks at whether it's necessary. So the necessity of you sharing a kitchen or a bathroom is one of the critical factors as to whether or not the Residential Tenancies Act applies. And they look at the agreement that you have between the two parties, between the tenant and the landlord, to determine whether or not this requirement actually exists. The real substance of the relationship, of the agreement, is what's examined in the law. So there's case law where the owner is required to share the building at the time the tenant rented a room. It's not sufficient that the owner intends to move in at some point in the future but doesn't live there when the tenant signed the agreement or took occupancy of the unit. There's other case law that says that the tenant knew from the beginning that the owner was going to be moving in. So that makes it a little bit more complicated. The law looks at it and sees that the intention was for the owner to live there. So just because there's a delay in the owner moving in does not change the relationship that they were required to share a kitchen or a bathroom. It's important to understand whether or not you're sharing a kitchen or a bathroom because it determines which law applies, which law is governing your relationship and your contractual agreement. In the scenario that I'm giving you, where you're sharing a kitchen or a bathroom with an owner, the Residential Tenancies Act does not apply. It's the common law that applies. This changes, however, if the owner moves out. So if the owner moves out, then the law that applies changes back to the Residential Tenancies Act. It does not mean, however, that if there's a disagreement between the landlord and the tenant decides they're not going to use the kitchen anymore, that the Residential Tenancies Act now applies, simply because they chose not to cook at that place anymore. The common law will continue to apply, again, because the real substance shows that they are required to share a kitchen or bathroom. They're just choosing not to. There's another scenario that I wanted to talk to you about. The Residential Tenancies Act has several exemptions that are not governed by it. And one of them, which we see quite a bit living in Renfrew County, is the living accommodation intended for traveling or vacationing public or seasonal or temporary accommodations. So this could be a seasonal trailer park, it could be a motel. In this scenario, the Residential Tenancies Act does not apply unless the tenant can prove that it does. And there's certain ways that a tenant can prove that the act applies, even though the original intention of the landlord was not to have it apply. And there's different legal requirements and different facts that are set out to make that determination in law. The focus is on the accommodation, not on what it's historically been. So whether or not it was always a seasonal trailer park or whether or not it was always a motel is not what the court or the landlord-tenant board would be examining. They're also not looking at what are the other units around you classified as. Are they seasonal or are they temporary? They only look at the case-specific facts in your circumstances. And if it's determined that the Residential Tenancies Act does not apply, then it's common law that applies, which is, in essence, case law. It's the real substance of the facts that they're looking at, not written documents and not superficial labels. So simply because a park is called a seasonal park does not mean that the law will treat your accommodation as a seasonal park. Again, if you have questions about this, we encourage you to get legal advice. There's a list of other specific requirements and specific exemptions from the Residential Tenancies Act that are existing in the legislation. If the legislation, the Residential Tenancies Act legislation, doesn't apply, then parties, whether you're a landlord or a tenant, are required to go to the courts in order to get any restitution, any orders. The small claims court is normally the court that these parties would have to go to. It has increased their limit to $35,000. So you can ask for damages and recovery of personal property up to $35,000 in small claims court. Anything over that would require you to go to Superior Court. And of course, there's always the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario where parties can go if there's been a human rights violation. So one of the big differences between Residential Tenancy Act and the common law is the issue of notice. And so when parties are looking at what their real obligations are, when they're terminating a tenancy, that's where the issue really comes to play. Because how much notice do I have to give the other party that I want to leave, that I don't want to live here anymore? So if I'm a landlord, what are my legal obligations in order to notify the tenant that I don't want them to live here anymore? And so that's why this distinction between the Residential Tenancies Act and the common law is so important. So if you are exempted from the Residential Tenancies Act, if your contractual relationship does not fall within that legislation, then as a landlord, you have a responsibility to provide what is reasonable notice. And that is determined on a case-by-case basis. So if a tenant, for example, has been living somewhere with you for 6 to 12 months and they pay on a monthly basis, then the courts have historically found that reasonable notice is 1 month's notice. That changes, however, depending on the facts of your case. If the Residential Tenancies Act applies, then there's different notice periods depending on the reason why you want to evict this person. Under the common law, you can evict the person for any reason. Under the Residential Tenancies Act, there are rules in terms of what you're allowed to evict for and what you're not allowed to evict for. Under the common law, the only thing that you're not allowed to do is violate the Human Rights Code. So I'll give you a couple examples as to what you can do under the Residential Tenancies Act as a landlord. If the accusation, and there's details in particular, provided that there's been an illegal act, then the landlord has 10 days that they can give the notice to the tenant for the termination date. After that, there would be a landlord-tenant board hearing. However, you can immediately apply to the Landlord and Tenant Board for an eviction. Under the Residential Tenancies Act, the only power that essentially allows anybody to evict anybody is the power under the Residential Tenancies Act that's given to the board. So a sheriff can't come and evict somebody. The police can't come and evict somebody if the tenancy is governed under the Residential Tenancies Act without an order from the Landlord and Tenant Board. This is a very important distinction. Also, if you're selling the unit and the new owner wants to move in, there's different rules for that. The notice of termination is 60 days. There's more involved, of course, than just giving a notice of termination, but I'm just going to highlight for you some of the changes and the differences between what happens if the Residential Tenancies Act applies and what happens if it doesn't. One of the common reasons for eviction is rental arrears, and that requires 14 days notice. So when you're looking at whether you're renting a room or whether you're covered under the Residential Tenancies Act, these are things to consider when determining what is the best course for you either as a tenant or as a landlord, so that everybody understands their rights and responsibilities. One of the differences in the Residential Tenancies Act is that they actually set out many of the maintenance standards that are required for landlords. And they also have other rules that are slightly different than the common law rules when you're renting a room and sharing a kitchen and or a bathroom. So the maintenance standards for sharing a kitchen or a bathroom, or if you're not covered under the Residential Tenancies Act, is governed by provincial legislation. So those provincial legislations treat rooming houses, for example, we use that as the scenario in this circumstance, slightly differently than they would treat other accommodations. And the reason they do that is because public policy has determined that rooming houses are situations where tenants are typically more vulnerable. So they set out certain criteria, such as the number of sinks that are required depending on the number of units, and how many toilets, things like that. The medical officer of health actually has specific legal rights and responsibilities dealing with rooming houses, and in particular they have a duty to inspect or have an inspection done on the premises for the intended use of a boarding house or a lodging house. The fire code also has certain requirements for these types of accommodations, and there's heightened building code requirements as well, which I'm not going to get into today, but if you're looking at becoming a landlord in this area, it's important to understand and get legal advice as to make sure that you are complying with all the applicable laws. When deciding to rent a place, it is a decision that is a difficult one. And we recognize that the market right now is extremely difficult for tenants, and that there's a lot of landlords who are interested in looking at renting, whether it's a basement or whether it's renting a room in their house, in order to help supplement their costs as everything keeps going up. It's extremely important that everybody gets legal advice so that everyone understands the terms and conditions going forward, and we're able to avoid lots of stress, we're able to avoid problems down the road, and hopefully we're able to secure housing and increased income for all the parties. So we at the Renfrew County Legal Clinic provide free legal advice and representation in certain cases to tenants, but we cannot also advise landlords. So therefore there is the Landlord Self-Help Center, where landlords can go in order to receive legal advice. And their phone number is 1-800-730-3218. And they help small landlords. And I can give you their website. It's www.landlordselfhelp.com. And there you can find frequently asked questions and information in order to help you when you're making a decision about what to do with an accommodation. We also highly recommend that you get independent legal advice before entering into this field so that you have all the information you need to make your unit a successful rental. I want to thank you, and I look forward to answering all your questions.
Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer Dombroskie and I work for the County of Renfrew Community Services. I'm very happy to be here today to share information, and I also look forward to the question period that will follow the presentations. The County of Renfrew Community Services provides supports and benefits to help people with childcare, housing, income assistance, emergency housing, as well as emergency financial aid. Landlords can play a critical role in housing stability beyond providing a home to rent. Landlords can help our community with rental housing by offering homes that have affordable rent rates and by offering homes that have energy efficiency to help with utility affordability. Financial flexibility around payment plans or payment dates is ideal, especially if a tenant has an unexpected life event or an interruption to their income. In some circumstances, landlords can be an important link in helping their tenants to overcome adversities and to have successful tenancies. At Community Services, we often have landlords reach out to us to discuss scenarios, and to inquire about ways to help their tenants. We welcome these conversations. Our clientele includes a wide demographic group, people of all ages, family sizes, and backgrounds. Generally, our services are geared to those who have low incomes, but we may be able to provide assistance where there is an interruption to income or if there is a personal emergency. Some examples of the supports provided through community services may include monthly Ontario Works benefits to help with shelter and basic needs, childcare subsidies to support families in going to work and paying for childcare, rent subsidies, which are very popular in helping people to have affordable rent. However, there is a wait list for that. There's the ability to help people with last month's rent payments, as well as with utility or rent arrears, should there be a period of financial hardship. The staff of community services are well versed in the programs that are offered throughout the County of Renfrew, as well as federally and provincially. Our staff were able to make referrals to other social services, health agencies, as well as other government benefit programs. Please do not hesitate to reach out to any of us at one of our 4 office locations in Pembroke, Renfrew, Arnprior, or Killaloe. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly if you have any future questions. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Peter Emo. I was a landlord. I recently stopped being a landlord because my wife wanted money in the bank. Brian and Mike and the Scott brothers are stars on HTV, and they're very old pals. I can't seem to sit down without thinking about Courtney and Kenny and their many colors. And so this will be a new world for you. There are a wide variety of design options for different needs and circumstances. Some of them are called granny flats. Some of them are carriage houses. Some are laneway houses. That's more usual term for some of the smaller dwellings in Toronto or Windsor, some of the older cities with narrower streets and back alleys. Garden suites, again, it may be a granny flat. It may be something built over your garage. It might be a separate standalone small unit, maybe known as a tiny house in some areas as well. And you'll have to decide, attached or detached. Attached meaning, is it my garage or my basement? And detached is it a new construction connected by a breezeway, or is it a standalone, depending on what your municipality's zoning laws allow? So our new building code and opening up of the walls, that's a pretty significant area. The building code is being revised this year. I think they're trying to meld the federal and the provincial building codes together. And so there'll be a bunch of new regulations come from that, and you'll need to be aware of it. Rule of thumb, if you open up the wall, you got to do something different with electric, plumbing, HVAC, heating, insulation, fire separation. Those are all pieces of the building code, and the old building code and anything that's been built prior to the last 5 years has to be upgraded. So it's always something to think about. And it's also, how far do I upgrade? Do I upgrade 20 feet back from a line, or do I have to put in a whole new line right from the box up? If you're talking about your house, or how much do I put into the wall in terms of fire separation, whether it's an extra sheet of drywall, or is it more insulation? And so presently there are over 2,500 approved subdivision lots, and this is in the County of Renfrew. There are over 4,900 approved non-subdivision lots, which are approximately 1/4 acre to over 5 acres, or under 5 acres. And then there are 6,400 parcels of land greater than 5 acres, and existing approvals for over 13,800 residential units. So we do not have a capacity issue. We're not overdeveloped. We don't have a shortage of land. What we seem to have is a reluctance to develop what we have. And whether that's risk takers or wise investment, or people thinking ahead, and pushing out with a long-term plan, I'm not sure what the issue is that we can't seem to get our land developed in the sense of houses or housing units put on it. So that's a concern, and again, that's something I think we're all going to have to ask questions about. So consultation is the key. You need to consult with your neighbors. You need to consult with the planner, rezoning, development charges, setbacks, etc. I say etc. because there's probably 10 or 12 other things that you could add in there, but they're all in the profession jargon. And until you take a look at your official plan and your zoning bylaw, I think they wouldn't make much sense to you. So you need to consult with the CBO. As I mentioned, the building code is changing, and when you're upgrading from old to new, there's a lot of work that has to be done. So you'll need to spend some time talking about that. There's individual circuits for bathrooms. There's individual circuits for your microwave. Just as two examples that it might not spring readily to mind. You need to consult with an architect. Downstairs, are you building it downstairs? Are you renovating a single car garage or a double car garage? And then will you have to add in the garage on the outside of it? Or are you putting an extension on your house? Or are you, instead of renovating, are you doing a new build? You know, back to, is it a granny flat? Is it a standalone? Is it a new garage with an apartment or a dwelling over top of it? So those are pretty important questions. And with that, so now that you've decided, when it's decided to go forward, you need to consult with your neighbors. You know, you have one neighbor on each side of you, two usually across the street because driveways don't line up, and two behind your back fence if you're in an urban setting. In a rural setting, you may not have that many neighbors, but still, you know, if you're on a smaller road, they're going to be curious about what's going on, and you know, you should keep them up to date as well. New points to consider at this point, and this is sort of an urban-rural split too. Sewage and septic tank if you're in a rural area. Electricity, dig it in from the sidewalk if you're in an urban setting. In a rural setting, you have to worry about how many poles do I have to put in and a transformer. And Hydro One is quite, let me use the correct term so I won't offend them too much, predatory. They don't give that stuff away, and it grates a little bit that you're putting that infrastructure out and then paying them to use the infrastructure you paid for, and they're not very user-friendly in terms of giving you a discount on doing that work. Water, again, urban setting from the sidewalk in, and rural, it's a well. And then with both sewage and water, does your existing line have the capacity to supply a new add-on dwelling? That's always going to be a concern. And again, septic tank and wells is quite similar to that, but internally, and if it's an older house, you probably should get your sewer discharge line scoped just to make sure that if it's clay, it hasn't collapsed or something hasn't grown through it. Because as soon as you start putting something in and you can back up, if you've built something in your basement, you're not going to like it. Natural gas hookup if you're in an urban area, and again, heat, HVAC, laundry. How are you going to handle those? Heat, realistically should be separated. So should your HVAC, especially now given the things we know about the pandemic. Laundry, if you're going to put an add-on, whether it's you're renovating your garage or you're going to do it in your basement, you want to walk down through somebody's living room to get to the laundry if you're sharing the laundry in the basement, or do you want them walking down through your rec room, coming in from what used to be your garage, down your rec room stairs to the laundry, spreading their laundry out on your rec room floor, and then you have to deal with that. Other issues, smoker, a weed smoker as well. If it's granny and grandpa that's moving in, that may not be as big an issue, but if it's somebody else, those are things you need to think about. Parking, will they have a vehicle? Will they have a visitor? Will it be two of them with two vehicles? Scooters. Increasingly, as we get a little older, our population is using scooters. So you're going to have, you might want to consider a roof over top of it, or where they're going to park them, where are they going to plug them in, and will that be sufficient into winter so their batteries don't freeze? So those are the kind of other things that may not spring readily to mind. Garbage and recycling, need smaller containers under your sink, and then you're going to need larger containers outside somewhere, or in a storage room at the back. And who takes that stuff out every Thursday morning? And And then storage. Everybody's got a Christmas tree. Everybody's got some little doodad ornaments they want to keep up and decorations. They may golf, they may ski as well, who knows? So storage is going to be an issue. How are you going to address that? And then we take a look at shared backyards. Are you going to let them have a party of your backyard? Are they going to use your backyard? Are you going to have to fence it off? Are you going to have to put a patio out there? Are they going to want their own barbecue? Dogs and cats. Will they have dogs and cats? Where does a dog and cat go to poo? Who picks it up? Who puts it out in the trash? Cat urine and dog urine. There is nothing as unpleasant as putting your tired head down on your pillow on your lounger and finding out that on the other side of the fence, somebody's dog and cat has been going daily 2 or 3 times a day for the last 6 months, and the hot sun is hitting it. That's a smell you do not want. Who's going to shovel the driveway? Who's going to shovel the walkway? Who's going to throw the salt down? Again, it's about your liability. So rule number 172, make sure you chat with your neighbors. And next, when we talk about mix the soup. So we're mixing the soup of ideas. So it's decide on where you're going to put it. Is it going to be your garage? Is it going to be down in your part of your basement? Is it going to be an attachment with a shared breezeway? Is it going to be a standalone over top of the garage with a new garage? Is it going to be just a standalone on itself? Then you get an architect to do a rendering. And what I like to do is it workable? So you walk through it. If you have to go out and take spray paint on your lawn, the measurements, and walk through it. And is the kitchen all right here? Or should it be over there? Should the washroom be over there? And will the washroom, when I rough it in, will all the pipes go straight down to my drains that I already have in the house? So I just put a Y in and things like that. And then once you've done that, go back to the architect, and they're pretty good to get you some real drawings. And then once you get to the real drawings, take them out, talk to the neighbors, explore with them what their thoughts are. Maybe they don't want the back window right there because it stares into their bathroom or into their bedroom or into their dining room, and they don't want people watching them eat. So they have some conversations around those. And then it gets time to get a contractor. Cousin Jerry, do not use Cousin Jerry. Just because Cousin Jerry carried a hammer when he was 17 to 19 on his way to university or college, doesn't mean he's a contractor. Now he's semi-retired or he's quit his job or he's not the guy you want. You want somebody who knows what they're doing. They know how to interact and schedule in the electrician, the plumber, the drywall guy, the roofing guy. If you're doing a foundation, the foundation guy. So you want somebody that knows what they're doing, that knows how to manage the job, and they know if the subs aren't doing their job. So it's very important. And you want somebody who's going to be able to talk to the building official too, the CBO, chief building official, when he walks in. He doesn't have time, or she doesn't have time, to spend hours educating Jerry on what's new, what the new regulations are, and what's the best way to insulate now. And so with that, get a permit. The consequences of unpermitted or illegal construction are quite significant, and it is illegal construction. So you're jeopardizing maybe the existing warranties on your house. You might be jeopardizing the warranties on on some of the materials or some of the products you get. You might negate your insurance coverage, especially with wiring and water. Those are two pretty significant issues, and fire separation. If somebody comes in and there's an unfortunate incident, you don't want to be fighting with them because you didn't have somebody initially that didn't know what they were doing. This way, and and in fairness to you, it spreads the liability around. Should something happen, your insurance company can sue or drag the other contractor or the contractor into it as well, and split some of the costs if there's a settlement. Stop work orders and fines. They cost money, but they cost time, because one of the interesting things is trying to get the contractors on site. And once you schedule them, they're always going to be late. And they're never going to tell you. They say they're showing up on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock. They don't do that. It's very rare. And they don't call you on Sunday night. They'll call you Monday after you made 62 phone calls. So if you have them there and there's a stop work order and you lose them, for them to fit you back into the rotation, it's going to be tough. And so you don't want any unexpected delays. That costs money in terms of getting them back. And then secondly, costs money in terms of getting your tenants or your relatives into the new space. And again, consult with your neighbors, contributing positively to the area. Don't allow blowing garbage. Make sure you get a bin or a truck, and deliver it, get it out there as fast as you can. There's nothing worse than a plastic bag that used to hold insulation blown across and wrapped around a neighbor's tree or up against their car, or cardboard, that held soffit or fascia. Get a go hut. You don't want somebody tromping into your house. If you got 4 or 5 guys on the job, you don't want them tromping into your house, use your bathroom, muddy boots in, muddy boots out, cat getting in, cat getting out. It's just it's not a good feeling. And you don't want to share your bathroom with 4 or 5 guys. It's just not the way you want to live your life. It's an added stress you don't need. So get a go hut. You got to be nice to your neighbors. So you got to be considerate about when it comes to the disruptive noise. Beepers on equipment, whether it's a little bobcat. If you're pouring some foundation, you may have a truck in with a long arm when it's going over top of your house and maybe over top of part of your neighbor's lot to blow concrete down into the forms. You got saws running, so try and set it up. Let them know what's going on. Let your neighbors know what's going on, and so they know the times. And try and keep it, after 7 o'clock and end at 7. And don't do it at Sunday beyond lawn cutting times, 9 o'clock or 10. Don't start at 7 in the morning. That's a sure way to have somebody interested in screaming or complaining about you. Traffic. You're gonna have a lot of tradespeople coming in. Make sure they know where to park so not blocking a neighbor's driveway. Maybe go every so often, just take a walk around to make sure that trucks are coming to drop off. There might be 2 or 3 trucks coming the same day. If you need cement blocks, the cement block guys come in. Maybe the insulation guy is dropping off bags of insulation or his equipment to blow it into your attic. And then you may have a drywall truck. And so all of those trucks line up. They always seem to, there's at least 1 or 2 of them show up at the right time. Plus you've got the truck coming to try and take the bin out. So you may need to do a bit of traffic cop and help organize it. Make sure that there's passage by so that people can get by. They may have to go slow and take it one at a time, but you can't have trucks blocking it, and you can't have half tons parked haphazardly in vans as well. So weeds and unmaintained outdoor spaces. Boy, there's no bigger eyesore than going by somebody's construction site and there's an 18-inch or 20-inch, 24-inch milkweed surrounded by a few twigs here and there and bare patches. So if you can, whip or snip those, just cut them down or even pull them out, and just so that it doesn't add to the look of abandonment or clutter. It can be quite daunting for your neighbors to go by that every day for 3 months, and yourself too when you're driving into your yard after work or after something. You look at and go, oh my God, somebody's got to do something about that. And so if you can just maintain that, I think it'll go a lot to make you feel a lot longer and a lot better to make you feel better. So next steps as you settle in, you walk your neighbors through. You get a tenant preferably with auto deposit, unless it's granny and grandpa and they've funded it. Then at the very, very minimum, you've already figured out whether you've got a different meter for gas, electricity, and water, and sewage. You may have different meters for that, or you may say, look, you're going to have to pay me a quarter of my bill, and you go over and sit over the kitchen table and work that out. But you should have something like that worked out ahead of time. And also you want to look around to see if there's any kind of municipal or provincial or federal funds that you can get to assist. Some municipalities, and I think you're going to see it more, it'll be introduced here, I think, early next year in our area. Some of them are saying, look, if you add to help us with the housing shortage, if you add a granny flat, we'll give you up to $5,000. That's not going to go a long way, but it's a start. And I think you're going to see the municipalities that are doing that now, and there's a few that have raced out in front, good for them. They're going to be changing it from $5,000, maybe 25 or maybe 10. I'm not sure the numbers yet. And the rest of us who are in the process of studying it to implement it, I think you're going to see us with a higher than $5,000 amount, but I can't make any promises on that. And you also should have a conversation with your insurance company, let them know what's going on, and your bank if you have a mortgage or if you had to take out a line of credit, just to keep everybody up to speed on, make sure they understand what you're doing, and so there's no surprises. And so with that, things to consider, and this is the scary part, the architect, I ballparked the numbers as best I can with COVID and the shortness of staff in terms of architects and planners. I'm going to say about $1,500 for a set of plans. It may be as much as double that. Zoning, if you have to change your zoning, it may be about $1,000. Again, I don't know. Development charges, some places, depending on what the name of the structure is that you're adding on, you have to pay development charges. Others, they don't have those for certain names, and I wouldn't even attempt to tell you what the names and the definitions are. That's part of your your research. You may have to submit the proper name to not be charged a development charges fee. And I took a 300 square foot, because that's for the sake of argument, if you were taking your garage 15 feet wide, 20 feet long, or 14 feet wide, 22 feet long, and about $300 a square foot, that, you know, it's anywhere between 50 and 90,000. And that's the easiest one, is to do your garage. Your basement apartment is quite different, because you have to make sure you have a number of windows, and you may have to cut windows in. You may want to, and you'll have to add insulation on some of the interior wall or exterior walls, and then it's, you know, there's an entire separation of the heating and HVAC system and the water system. So it's I think the basement one is probably a little more expensive than the garage, but I've done my best to give you an estimate that shouldn't scare you away. Outdoors, I threw a number down about $5,000. You have to put a fence in. You know, it's a bunch of 4x4s, some 2x4s, and some 5/4 by 6 boarding and a gate. And so that's not an unreasonable number. Contingency, I put down a line of credit. My rule when I was doing this was I always, if my final number was 90,000, I put 25 aside, because you just never knew. The furnace might start huffing and puffing, and you have to put a new furnace in if you're sharing it. If you're doing a basement, or even if you're doing a garage, you suddenly find a crack in the foundation, you got to dig it out, put some magic gel in there to close the gap, and then you have to put some water resistant membrane and some parging and tarring and all of those things, and then backfill it. So it's a good idea to have a contingency. Hopefully you don't have to spend it, but you just might have to at some point. Neighbors, I put this in as a cost. If there's 4 couples, 6 Corona per couple times 8 visits, and 8 steaks for the last day. You know, when you unveil it, I'm teasing a little bit, but it's very important to maintain good relationships with your neighbors, keep them up to date, and don't let them caught by surprise. So I'm hopeful this is helpful for you. I couldn't be any more specific, but thank you very much for your time and attention. And like our other panelists, I'm more than happy to answer your questions.